Because we are tribal. If you stuck your head above the parapet, you are pretty likely to get shot down. Now, what happens is when we present, that old primal brain kicks in. I can't stick my head above the tribe. I can't do it because my life is threatened, which is a complete mismatch of the situation. And one of the ways to deal with it is to reframe it as a conversation, because that's exactly what it is. It's a conversation with one person speaking at a time. That's it.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Thrive and Achieve with your host, Dr. Matt Markel. Thrive and Achieve is the only podcast where professionals help professionals to succeed in career and wealth. Now, here's your host, Dr. Matt Markel.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Thrive and Achieve, where professionals help professionals thrive in their career and achieve financial success. Today, we are honored to have Frankie Kemp as our guest. I asked Frankie to be on this show because she teaches skills that we all need, speaking so people want to listen. Now, who among us wouldn't want those skills, right? Exactly. She has built and sold an acting school, moved on to TV as a director and a scriptwriter for the Eurovision Song Contest. Frankie is an award-winning storyteller, actor, and playwright, blending theater craft, psychology, and business savvy to help technical specialists communicate with flair and impact. Her book, Technical Experts Become Powerful Presenters, has been downloaded over 100,000 times, and her training has helped thousands of clients worldwide speak so that others listen. Frankie, welcome to Thrive and Achieve.
Welcome. Thank you.
Hey, let's jump right in. Frankie, what's the root cause of why technically strong professionals, engineers, analysts, operators, why they often fail to own the room, speak so others want to listen when they clearly know their material?
There are several reasons, but actually, as you were speaking, I was thinking of a really emotional one, which is an apologetic mindset. I'm taking up your time with my words. And then what happens is you end up, or they end up, trying to cover their tracks by over-explaining, which is a real sign when you over-explain of fear or a lack of self-esteem because you don't think your words stand for themselves and you're trying to justify and then justify. So that's one reason. There's another reason, which is a lack of identifying or explicitly stating the needs from the other person's point of view. So, for example, you have somebody in tech who's pitching an idea to someone in ops. Then when you do that, they need to see it, or you, because I'm speaking to you all out there, from their point of view, from the ops point of view. Like, how is this a good thing for them? How will it make life easier for them? And give concrete examples. They need to know that you understand their pain. So that's the other reason. And the third one is the habit of going into too much detail, technical detail, which might be fine in your stand-ups. But if you're speaking to people who, and I was going to say non-technical, but even technical people who are in another domain still need a certain clarity and an unknotting of what you're talking about, because the technical people I speak to, they're all on different projects, many of them. And so if you're not explaining the context, the why, the what, the how, in a very basic way at the beginning, you've lost them. So there are these three main reasons why technical and non-technical people, it's the emotion, the lack of the what's in it for me, and the habit of detail, all work against people in making themselves really clear and getting their message over.
That is such a concise set of reasons, and I've seen them as a engineer, as an engineering leader, as a corporate leader. I've kind of seen all of those. Really, I was going to, so you know the material like backwards and forwards, but I was going to see, could those not fall ultimately, all three of those, under not seeing the world through the eyes of the audience? Like so definitely the middle one is you're not seeing the world through the eyes of the audience, right? The latter one, too much detail. The audience, because you're not putting yourself in their shoes, you're giving them the detail that you care about, but that may not be the detail that they care about. And being apologetic, they're there for a reason. They're there to hear what you have to say. And so if you're feeling shameful about having to be up there, you're not seeing the world through their eyes, because they don't want you to do that, but they'd want you to get to the point on things. So it's kind of like all three of those fall under the concept of, at least to me, of like not seeing the world through the lens of the audience. What do you think of that?
I think that that's a very pertinent comment, because once you start to see everything through their eyes, you realize how much of whatever you're trying to justify, explain, is actually irrelevant. It's like a sieve, a colander. That's the whiffum, the what's in it for me from the audience's point of view. And when I say audience, I mean this in the loosest way possible, because you could just be having a conversation with your boss, and your boss isn't always the most technical person in the room. It's like, just tell me what are you doing? So yeah, so the whiffum is the seeing it from the other person's point of view helps to mitigate against the other two problems, which is the over-explaining, the apologetic nature of people, and yeah, just those two.
When I was working in defense, we would write a lot of proposals, and engineers would want to tell, as they came up with this solution that they're going to talk about in the proposal, they would want to tell the story of how they got from, well, we tried this, but you see that didn't work, and then so we pivoted to here, and then we learned this, but we knew that wasn't quite, and they'd tell this, they'd have this whole story, and that took, that would take pages in a very page-constrained proposal. So I made several rules to help people do better proposals. But one of them was no temporal stories, right? I don't want to hear the story of how this happened and then that led to this. That'd be great at the bar. That'd be great around the fireside. That would be great for your TED Talk, but not in a proposal. Proposal, we need to know, again, seeing through the eyes of the audience, what's in it for me? Why am I reading this? What is your solution? Because I got 10 other people to look at. I don't want to hear the story of how you got here. I want to hear what your solution is, at least in that type of writing.
So you remind me of a couple of years ago, I was part of a government scheme here to help Ukrainian business leaders who are in tech to hone their 3 minutes pitch for London Tech Week. And London Tech Week, I mean, it's horrible, those pitches, because everybody's just standing there. People are just walking by. It's like a marketplace, like a souk, right? And they're just walking by, going, somebody talking about their business, walking by. And so it's a tough one. And I say it's a tough one. I've done street theatre. I'd rather do that. So I was training people to do that. And I remember the first day when I was watching these 9 wonderful people do their pitches, I was going, nobody gives a about the story, like your 5-year story. I'm so sorry. But I said, you've got a great idea. I don't even know why I'm apologising, because you need to tell us about your idea, the benefits, what it is, and there's a special structure. But yeah, they all once upon a time.
When I was a young child, I thought about that. So can you walk us through like a specific example of how somebody's gone from and we've touched on these a little bit, gone from since the dawn of time, I've thought about whatever, to owning the room, to commanding the attention that everyone wants to have when they're a speaker in the room. What is the preparation, the decisions? How did you coach someone through that?
Right. So, okay, the first thing to do is to define the subject, the audience, and the whiffum. That is the benefit. The benefit you pull from the subject and your audience. And then you can match the what's in it for me. And often that means speaking to people beforehand, because walking around with a crystal to try and divine it or using telepathy doesn't necessarily work as the most reliable means. How many people are actually saying, if there's one thing that you would need to know before I see you in that meeting or in that presentation, what would it be that would make your time worthwhile, right? Just ask. Secondly is, what do you want them to think, feel and do? So think, feel, do means that it's going to impact on the way you speak, the language you use, and the action that you're steering them towards will be backed up by all the examples that you give, but you need to know where you're steering them towards. Then the third part of this is to put together your content. So I haven't even touched the content yet, because the typical situation is this. Once I've done subject, audience, benefit, or the WIFM, key message, audience motivator, they all mean the same thing, the WIFM, and you've done the think, feel, do, people naturally start going, I know, I can tell them this, this and this. And I'm like, you're there. That's the middle of it. Now, many of you at school, if you're really honest, if you were ever given an essay to write, you would have done it anything like me, like the 11th hour, 2:00 in the morning. That's when I get my idea for Hamlet, right? And I put it off until then because it always just seems too arduous. Because what we've been told is you begin at the beginning. Well, yeah, when you're speaking, but when you're planning, no, because you're going to make life very hard for yourself. You begin in the middle, that will take you towards the end, and then at the beginning, then you know what you're introducing. And that is the way the ancient Greeks taught oratory. So oratory was the main backbone of your education in ancient Greece, and they said you start in the middle, go to the end, and then the beginning. And then after that, you add your engagement techniques. So the spices are attention grabbers that you add. And here's a note, your slides are a spice. They are not your presentation. And I work with engineers who are told, I don't know how to make these 67 slides that I've been given interesting for a presentation. I've only got 10 minutes to get my point across. So I go, okay, just look at them, because then you might use them. But let's now sweep them aside. Subject, audience with them. Think, feel, do. Plan the middle, then the end, then the beginning. Add the spices. And that's when we look at the slides.
That is, I love that. Make sure you pause the episode and make sure you've got those things down. Subject, audience, and the what's in it for me, think, feel, do, from the content start in the middle, then the end, and then the beginning. And I didn't know that stemmed from the ancient Greeks. That's kind of the way I've started doing things. Well, I've been doing things for quite a while now. When I did my TED Talk, I was like trying to think of these are the pieces that we're going to do. So the middle is a series of pieces, right?
Yeah.
And you're trying to figure out how to, how should I put these together? Should it be this? And then you have pieces, and those pieces become arcs, and then those arcs become the major themes, and then you figure out kind of like the order, and then the beginning, and then the ending is like what basically whatever your CTA is, call to action is, and then the beginning is like, how should you introduce this in a way that gets to that hooks, but also doesn't take too much time, because you want to kind of get into the things that you're really wanting them to do while still setting the the feeling that you want them to have. I just love that. That's what a great framework.
And the thing is that after that, you then practice, and you don't do prompt cards at that point, because you don't know what's going to prompt you. You don't even know if you need them. Sometimes I've used a mind map when I've done a keynote. I just use the mind map. I don't even use the cards.
So what's a prompt, just to make sure everyone is on the same page? A prompt card is
So a prompt card is, so you see Jamie Oliver, he used it because he's dyslexic. He didn't want to look at the screen when he did his TED Talk, so he held a card. Now a card is not for the audience. It's not for the audience, it's for you. Your slides are for the audience. Now I have to differentiate, because a lot of people will say, oh no, I need all those words on my slide because otherwise I won't know what to say. I went, okay, prompt cards then. You need prompt cards because that's no good for your audience. They won't remember anything. Don't remember things in bullet points. That's not how the mind works. So the prompt cards are basically 4 words, 4 lines, and that's what, I mean, sometimes I'll just have a quote or a statistic, because those are the 2 things I tend to forget, is the quote and the statistic. And I'll have that on maybe 1 or 2 cards. But when I was doing the Eurovision Song Contest, we had just prompt cards over prompt cards over prompt cards. And then, of course, you tie them together, because I wrote the script for the Eurovision. And we tie them together because, of course, if they fall, pandemonium. So it's always good to make sure they are tied together. But you don't necessarily need that. And also on a screen, you will still use the 4 words, but make them really big, because adrenaline stops you from reading properly. So you don't see the detail. I mean, because from a survival point of view, it's related to fight, flight, freeze. You don't want to be looking at the veins on the leaves. You need to be looking at the mammoth coming towards you. So that's why we just don't see the detail. We just see immediate threats. And hence, that's why you need the font bigger, only 4 words per line, and then you just scroll down. I was watching newsreaders over COVID who was saying, they don't use the teleprompter. They have more control at home if they're just using the arrow. So that's it. But, this is also one way to prepare when you're doing a presentation. But then I will help people if they're doing a stand-up or an update. There's another format, and that takes about 10 minutes to learn, and it's career changing. And then you've got the ProEP, which is how to put your idea out there. If you've got an idea and you're being brought into a senior meeting, what usually happens is, oh my gosh, I've got a presentation where they've been asked me to show my idea, but I've been brought into the SLT meeting. So they spend the whole weekend doing their pack of 150 slides, like it's 1983, and then they come in and they're forgotten about. And then as people are packing away, they go, oh, Natasha, did you have something you wanted to speak to us about? And Natasha's going, how can I get through my slides? Well, I'm saying, drop the slides. You don't need them. There's a 5-minute no slide way of doing this. So, part of my job is to give people as many tools that they need, so that they're flexible and they can do this off the cuff.
Amazing.
Because,
Amazing.
Life throws curveballs.
The being able to speed up a presentation, being able to just switch to okay, we don't have time for your slides. Give me the elevator pitch, right? That's we often, that just because of scheduling, that's what happens. It's like
Totally.
Can you just give me a synopsis of this, and then we'll basically just so we kind of do an initial filter, and then if it resonates, then we'd like to see more detail on it. But it's if you don't have that elevator pitch and you start like with since the dawn of time, that sort of thing, you won't get through it. So really, I've seen this come down to just complete mastery of the material you're trying to talk about. Not so much the roadmap necessarily, because that's what the prompt cards I think help you with, is like basically we're going to go do this part, and then then you're prompted to go into the next phase of the story, or next phase of the pitch, or next phase or whatever. But if you have complete mastery of your material, if you know your stuff basically, which is kind of a prerequisite for any sort of speech, then it seems like if you kind of do that and you use your tips, then you can be a winner pretty easily.
Yes, and in addition to what you're saying, and because you held a leadership position in tech, is to drop the jargon and speak plain English. Because if you're leveraging white labels, it doesn't mean anything, really, unless you're in packaging. Although I heard somebody in business development, I said, what do you do? She says, well, I optimize and leverage white label solutions. And we were in a workshop, so I said, okay, everybody, let's just write in the chat what we think Sandy does. She wasn't really called Sandy. And they all said some packaging. Does she work for 3M? Post-it notes. And she was horrified. She went, I'm in business development. I said, okay, you're speaking to senior people. You want to drop that. I said, in fact, actually, you're speaking to people. Just drop it. It's the higher you go up the ladder, the less people want to hear that language. And I always thought when I was starting out, I always thought, God, isn't it amazing how people speak plain English, no jargon, and they get to the point really quickly. You know, those two things are real, that's leadership communication. But you don't wait till a leader doesn't necessarily mean the one at the top, the one in the boardroom. You're all leaders. I think the cleaner's a leader. You know, you're all leaders. Just speak plain English. The amount of times I've had people in the same room speaking jargon, like about best practice, but nobody really knew what best practice was when you broke it down, because it was a shortcut for all types of behavior.
I'm going to not comment on my thoughts on the phrase best practices.
Please do.
It's a euphemism for acknowledging that you should be doing something in a better way, or you should be doing something in a different way, but you don't know exactly what it is, and you're probably not going to follow up on it. But you can use the phrase best practices in because it makes you feel better about yourself.
Yeah,
That's been my experience. Because if it really was a best practice, it would be a norm of the organization, right? It would be
not an ideal.
Right. It'd be how we operate, or it would be a standardized procedure, so this is how we do things. This is, it's not like you get to choose, like there's 5 different ways to do things and this is the best. It's like, no, this is how we do things, do it this way. We've decided this is the way we're going to do things. We purchase things this way. We do employee evaluations this way. It's is it your best practice? How many different ones did you try? It's really just it's your practice, or it's your norm. And if you say like, well, we should be writing down our best practice, it's a whole thing of like of people feeling they should be doing more because their systems are not optimized, and they have this sort of guilt about it, but they don't exactly know what they do, so they resort to the phrase best practices. In my experience.
Yeah, I've seen that. So I'm not going to say that this is, all the time, because I wouldn't have that global knowledge, but I definitely have seen that. That's definitely been my experience. And the way you speak about it reminds me of James Clear's work on habits. So as soon as you say, we are the people that do this, this is how we do things, you make it an identity, not something that it sounds like it's tagged on as an idea.
Right. And cultural norms are a key aspect of that. This is how we behave, and this is how we'll call out those among us who aren't following the norms, because dealing with transgressions is what keeps norms from fading away.
Yeah, and I love how not being best practice is equal to a transgression, when actually maybe not being best practice was pragmatic and necessary for the time.
Absolutely. So we are talking to Frankie Kemp today. Frankie is the brains behind bringing a lot of insight from theater and screenwriting to helping professionals be better speakers and own the room and speak in a way that causes others to want to listen. Frankie, tell us just a little bit about your professional journey. How did you get to where you are today?
Well, I always start off by saying my background is, and then I realize my background is actually my foreground. I went to drama school, so that's definitely well behind me. And when I came out of drama school, I was doing what they call fringe theatre, which is where art meets voluntary work. So between non-paid acting jobs, I was going and typing, and I thought, I cannot function like this. This is no life. So I set up an acting school, 15 kids in a scout hut, and then it was a 2-centre business with children and adults 5 years later. Because what was happening was the adults were seeing what was happening to their children. And what was happening is that I was training them in drama, but not to do the big play in the summer, but to use theatre techniques so that if they wanted to go and do acting later on, they could, but it was to give them communication skills and confidence. And when they saw their children blossoming like that, they said, we want you to do the same for us. And I brought in mime artists and dancers, singers. And so it was quite a rounded experience. It was all after school or after work, and it was a release for everybody. But I realised actually at a certain point that I wasn't getting, and I think this is pertinent to say here, I was not getting the financial advice that I needed. So I would present my, at that time, little Excel spreadsheet to my accountant, and she'd go, "You're still in business and you can pay me." Tick. And I was under a government scheme where if you were every 6 months, if you were still in business, they would give you the equivalent of a financial pat on the head, which was something like £30 then. I mean, even those days, £30 did not go very far. So you'd get that every 6 months. And if I went along to them for advice, it was, well, maybe you can give out some more leaflets, or they were so useless. In the end, I only realised many, many years later that I was running a social enterprise because I never put my prices up. And I wanted to keep my prices down because I wanted to get the kids from the less affluent houses in, because at that time there was a lot of theatre companies coming up. They were just bounding through, and they would squeeze money out of the parents for the agency, and we're going to get your kid in the latest series, whatever that is, and promises. And I just said no, and I'd never promise anything like that, not even a summer production. It was like an open workshop, come and have a look. I said, if you want them to have better communication skills and confidence. And in the end they were like, I think only one parent in 5 years said, actually, I'd rather have that than the other stuff with the big production. So, but I couldn't live on it because it was like going up a down escalator. So I sold the whole lot. I went to Africa for a couple of months on the back of a truck. And then I got a job in Turkey. And initially in Turkey, I was just teaching English, but that was future imperfect. And I ended up doing loads of corporate training because before I ended up writing speeches for NGOs and ambassadors presenting at the UN, was some of these adults that I was working with. So I was able to do a similar kind of work in Turkey. But then I was meeting people, and then I ended up acting, and I was in bilingual immersive theatre before immersive theatre became a thing. And then I met a bloke in a pub, and he introduced me to the agent of a very well-known actress. Initially, it was for a global, she didn't say what it was, it's a global television, and would I help her with her English? And I thought, again, future imperfect. I'd rather, just not interested in that at all. But I thought, well, she's an actress, so that'd be okay. So I went along, and it was for the Eurovision. So we found all these old broadcasts of the Eurovision. And I said, oh, you could say this. This would have been a fun thing to do. And then and she was rolling around laughing. She says, you have to write my script. So I went, yeah, sure. Did not know how to write a TV script. I knew how to write a play script, did not know. So I tracked somebody down. He sat with me for an afternoon, showed me how to format it, what to consider. It was like going to film school, but a lot quicker and cheaper. And then I did that. And to cut a very long story short, I then came out of that, came back, and ended up working for a company that liked to have actors training business people, but would I write their programs? So I wrote communication skills programs, interview skills programs, presentation ones as well. And at the same time, I'd got heavily into improv. So I was doing lots and lots of improv and joined a troupe until I left that company, did an NLP practitioner, then a master in NLP. And then I thought, I'm going to spread my wings and set up my own company. So I set up my own company, and I've made comedy films, and I've won awards for that. And I've done storytelling, and I've won awards for that. And storytelling is something I help people with, because everybody goes, well, I'm not a natural storyteller. And I'm like, not only do you are a natural storyteller, because I've heard you tell stories to me as soon as I walked in the room, but you need those stories because they will steer action. So that is something that I show people how to do. And that is, it brings together the theatre, the psychology, so the performance, the ability to write a message. And also I have a research-backed blog. So I'm doing videos and writing on a weekly basis. And that means, you're constantly learning, because behavioural science is fascinating. And it's great when I work with companies like I did last year in the States, big pharma, where they're like, we want you because you do the improv, but you'll give the behavioural science behind it. And that's what our people want, because it adds credibility and a rationale for the theatre side. So that's what I was doing and have been doing, and everything is customized. I think that's the joy of improv is, it's about the moment and giving your audience what you want and what they need in the moment.
And you get that feedback that is so important as well, right? That's what I think is, I've never done improv, but I've liked watching it. And it seems like the ability to get that feedback of this is really resonating. I know when I was a musician, playing on stages where you could see the audience, you could see how they're reacting, was so much more fun than playing on the stages much more concert hall type things where you can't see the audience. Yeah, the lights are on you. You can't see the audience at all. There's the sound from them just doesn't carry the way that the acoustics are set up. All the sound goes out. It's hard to even hear the other members of the band because the sound isn't meant to, unless you're on like monitors, the sound doesn't naturally go from one band member to another. It goes out. So you get it ends up feeling like a very sterile environment. And
I know exactly what you mean. Yeah. Because I took up jazz singing at one point, and and it was just like that. And if you can't, but I think also, with being, what kind of musician were you? What was the genre?
I did a lot of, I'm a trumpet player. I did a lot of jazz, a lot of big band. I had my own jazz trio for a while. And then the later part of my musical career, I did a lot of horn rock band things, Tower of Power, Chicago, those types of tribute bands.
So, when you're doing jazz especially, so if I go down to Ronnie Scott's, for example, in Soho, there's just, you could see they love, well, I just don't think it's just jazz, it's just like musicians. Because like any performer, they work off the audience. It's actually a two-way, it's a street, like with comedy. So,
right.
Yeah.
So if someone listening is like a mid-level manager and they've got their big presentation, and let's kind of like maybe map out, and they know it's a month away. How would you break out a kind of a plan for them to focus on? We've seen a lot of the pieces. Is there like a structure you would say to do in terms of like, what you would need to do by such and such a date, or just how can we be very tactical to help these folks?
The first thing is, you do not need to lock yourself up in a room for a day. I was working with engineers last week, and I wanted to show them that overwhelm is not necessary, because they're not professional presenters. They're engineers who have to give a presentation. Therefore, you want to be able to shoehorn it into your day. Subject audience with them is something you can do before you've finished your coffee. And you just make a note, maybe on a Post-it or something. And then you've got your think, feel, do. That's something that you can work out while you're walking to the photocopier or the water cooler or wherever. That's that. Write it down so you don't forget it. Make a note in your phone. The longest period of time for prep is 20 minutes. So to do a mind map, as Tony Buzan talks about in mind mapping, the optimum amount of time for the first draft is 20 minutes and no more, because after 20 minutes, the synapses that create synchronous thinking and idea generation don't work with quite as much speed after 20 minutes when you're by yourself. So I'm just talking about this very specific process. It works in short bursts. So I would definitely say the longest amount of time is 20 minutes. And when you do your mind map, you want it on a landscape, because it kind of reflects the way the brain makes connections, and you'll think much more connectedly, synchronously that way. And that's 20 minutes. And that you can do whilst you're having a sandwich. And then you add the spices, just keep it there. And then you're like, oh, I can tell a story there. Oh, I've got a slide I can use there. And you know exactly where you can, because you've got like this map. So that gives you the aerial view. And for the opening and closing, once I give people the structure, the very specific structure of an opening and closing, just say you've got your mind map over there. They make a couple of bullet points there, and they make for the opening, and they make a couple of bullet points here for the closing. So remember, you do the closing first, and then you introduce it. That's when you're writing it. And then, and this is really important, so everything else you've just managed to slot in 5 minutes here, or 2 minutes there, or while you're boiling the kettle. The longest one was the mind map, which you're doing while you're having a sandwich, is to talk it out with somebody else. Because another reason why people are nervous is this. The first time they present is when they're doing the presentation. And you know, something really weird happens. The words go one way, the mind goes another, and it takes ages, if ever, for them to meet up in the same place. And actually, sometimes the words you wrote are not serving you. Because, for example, we speak in shorter sentences than we write. So when people are preparing, they start whacking the typewriter and writing these long treatises. And I look at them, I go, you don't speak like that. And then I'd coach them out of that. So you need a couple of bullet points. What you need is landmarks, bollards in the road, not breadcrumbs. Because if you've got the breadcrumbs, you're going to worry about losing your lines. That also adds to anxiety and nerves. You don't need to learn your lines in most presentations. I mean, if you're giving a speech at Davos, then you would, but then becoming a sight reader that sounds genuine, that's another skill that I need to teach people to do, because I do voiceover work. So I'm like, okay, this is how you read and make it sound genuine. And just because you're reading, it doesn't mean you don't use body language. Because if you watch any voiceover actor who is reading, exactly. I mean, when I do voiceovers, I've got this, I won't move it because it'll change the sound for this podcast, but it's a standing mic because I'm moving around all over the place.
Yeah, I have a special mic. My mic's on a boom that goes out of the way, so I have plenty of space to use my hands. And we haven't done it yet, but usually about every show at some point or another, I hit the mic with my hand and it creates a big sound. I usually edit those out, but but yeah, because even though people may be listening to this on the audio only, we're moving around, we're talking with our hands and gesturing, because that's how people. There's the connection between that and how we speak, and the authenticity in the words that come out is very, very high. If you just read something and you try not to move your hands, you have to work 10 times as hard to have it come across as authentically as then if you just like move around, like this is how we talk and this is how we move.
Yeah.
Anyway, I love that idea of landmarks, not breadcrumbs, because I think back to when I was preparing for my TED Talk last year. For me, it was a series of almost like scenes that and I could, once I got into a scene, I knew how the scene was going to play out, because the scene was a story basically, and or a section in that. But to remember the landmarks, that when you get to Albuquerque, we're going to make a right turn here, and we're going to go into the Santa Fe or whatever to for some reason use a New Mexico example. Anyway, and remembering those landmarks. So when I'm done with this segment, this is where we go next, as opposed to like every single thing along the way, because that could be hundreds of things to have to remember in a particular order. Whereas if you remember the segments, okay, we're going to do this segment here, and then we're going to move that into this segment here, and then from this is where we're going to dwell on the pain points, and then from there we're going to introduce the solution. Whatever the arc is, that to me was the way that I ultimately got the grasp of how I was going to communicate this. Was have a series of stories or segments or scenes that I knew how to tell, and then just remember how to get from one to another.
Yes. And going back to what you said about your TED Talk, you did also say that at first you were thinking, and maybe I got this wrong, but you had loads of ideas and they were quite scattered. Now, because I work with technical people, they're going to see the minutiae first, and they go, oh, I've got to work from the minutiae down, up. And I go, great, let's do that then. Put all the ideas down, maybe on post-it notes on a window, and then you've got subject, audience, with them. You've got think, feel, do. And then what'll happen over the next few days, if it's in front of you, and you can put it on the mini ones, the mini post-it notes on a piece of paper on your desk if you don't want to plaster your house, because it might pee some people off. But what you can do is just put all the ideas down, and when you're looking at them, but have them in view, because the subconscious then sorts it out without you having to do the work. And then you'll come back to it and you'll go, oh, I don't need that, I don't need that, I don't need that. And there's three themes here. Okay, it's sorted. So you started with the minutiae and you work your way up like this. And then I do work with some people who are very chronological and they get bemused by the mind map. So there we are. That was a whack of the microphone. We knew it was going to happen.
I just hit the microphone again, as promised.
You preempted it, like wonderful storytelling. It was foreshadowed. And what they do is that these engineers, they say, can we work chronologically? Of course you can. Right? But then sometimes, again, they work from the detail. And I go, great, we'll pull out the ones when you've got a minute that don't fit with the themes, with them and with whom you're talking. And then what we'll do is we'll just then run it down into this chronological format. So when I'm training people, it's finding the optimal way for them to work. So I've got a system, and then obviously it needs twisting and bending for other people, and it fits into their lives because you shoehorn it into your lives. Because to be honest, absolutely honest, if I was to confess something from the bottom of my heart, I hate preparing presentations. So what I like to do is assume that everybody else also does that, and I want to make it easy for them.
Amazing. So you had a lot of experience, and we've talked a little bit about body language and even when you do voice only things, how important that is. If someone is going to be on a stage being literal, or stage and being in front of their peers, of the next level up, maybe even the SLT, ELT, is there something that you could tell? Let's say someone listening to this has a speech tomorrow. One takeaway for presence, body language that they could do to increase authority when they're giving their speech tomorrow.
Right. The reason why I'm pausing is because, interestingly enough, it's not just related to gesture. Even though you've asked me about body language, you're asking me about the opening, and a lot of people put themselves on a back foot, excuse the pun, by introducing their name and their job role right at the start, which is so unnatural. It's yet another reason amongst the list of why people get very nervous. Because to stand there and say, hi, my name is Jim Bloggs and I'm head of... you don't walk into a room and do that. That's not natural. How many of us have had a conversation with somebody, we've engaged with them, and then 10 minutes later you're like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't ask your name. What's your name? They're not interested in your name yet. They're trying to take you in. That's how the brain works. Do I like them? Do I trust them? What's in it for me? And you don't tell them what's in it. You don't give them your name until you've told them the benefit of them listening to you. And then even before that, you want what I call a spice, and I have these on a one-pager. And a spice is an attention grabber. But more than that, it's a conversation starter. Because what you want to do is make a presentation feel like a two-way street. So what we're doing is we're shifting the content to make it more conversational. And then you put a conversational item at the top to open it. Now that might be quite simply a rhetorical or direct question. You might go, the other day I was walking down the street, and start to tell a story. Do not begin with a joke. That's a very bad idea. No, depends on timing, and to be nervous while you're doing it is just going to destroy the joke. So no, not jokes. Yeah, questions, a funny picture, but needs to be related. Don't just put something there arbitrarily. Something to engage. And the wonderful thing about doing that at the beginning of a presentation is you'll do it for yourself just as much as the audience, because although you're engaging the audience, it's that this is just a two-way street where you become more relaxed. That means your nervous energy will be abated. And the other thing is, if you were to introduce with yourself with your name, it becomes very difficult to move, because what we do is we generally use gesture in tandem with vocal emphasis. That is the basis. Now, if you say and if you're just listening to this, you won't be able to see what I'm doing. But if I say my name is Frankie Kemp, and I've just done a big gesture on Frankie, it looks unnaturally theatrical. And it doesn't match. It's not coherent with what I'm saying. But if I say something like, have any of you felt nervous? And my hand is out and it's sweeping towards my audience, which seems a perfectly natural gesture to do with the specific device of asking a question. What actually happens is you start to get rid of nervous energy. So many people complain to me, they go, they get shaky voice, they get shaky limbs. We've got fight, flight and freeze, because your amygdala starts to trigger threat and the adrenaline pumps, your heartbeat raises, your blood pressure goes up and you shake. Now, I heard somebody who was allegedly a consultant, and he said men need to, what did he say? Hold and stress your thighs when you walk on stage if you're shaking, and women need to squeeze their bums. Now, what happens is, if you do that when you walk on stage, you will look like you've got hemorrhoids. That's not a great opener. I would say you want to more naturally build in movement by using gesture in tandem with vocal emphasis. And if you change what you're saying so it's not your name, you'll look more engaging, you'll feel more confident, and it'll sound much more conversational.
I love that. So no squeezing your thighs or
or anybody else's. You wait till you're off stage.
The show specifically does not condone squeezing anyone else's thing.
Oh my God, no, I've done it again.
But I love that the way I've found for me that works the best to help get rid of some of that nervous energy before I'm going on stage or giving a speech or whatever is I will talk to people and try to be overly dramatic in my gestures before I go on. So if I'm going to be going on, I might find somebody, maybe it's a stagehand, maybe it's somebody else, maybe it's a friend of mine or whatever, and I'll be talking and I'll try to get my body moving more. Yes. And in doing that, you're over exaggerating your gestures. And in doing that, then when you do make a gesture, it feels natural. And I think I've seen you talk on this exact same thing as well in some of your videos, because if you're tight and nervous and everything's all in here, both vocally and physically, you'll be very stunted in how you That's right. How you come across. Very, as opposed to be overly dramatic in the beginning. Then when you go on stage, the nerves will kind of ratchet you back a little bit, and they'll ratchet you back right into the point where it seems comfortable, it seems natural, and it seems like you're able to have a conversation at that point with the audience.
That's such a good tip, actually. Overdoing it will actually bring up your norm. So your norm becomes, especially on a large stage, so for example, TED, you need to ratchet it up a little bit. So you're overdoing it, but then your norm will be more amplified. And I like that, because also you're getting rid of that, nervous energy. And just as a little note to people, because they punish themselves for being nervous. They're like, I'm head of, and I've done this and I've done that, or I'm managed all these teams. I don't know why I'm so nervous. What's wrong with me? Because we are tribal. If you stuck your head above the parapet, you are pretty likely to get shot down by a catapult or whatever they used when they were hunter-gatherers, or a spear, because you are a risk to the rest of the tribe. Now, what happens is when we present, that old primal brain kicks in. I can't stick my head above the tribe. I can't do it. because my life is threatened, which is a complete mismatch of the situation. And it's our primal brain is misreading the situation, that it's actually not a life and death situation anymore. And one of the ways to deal with it is to reframe it as a conversation, because that's exactly what it is. It's a conversation with one person speaking at a time. That's it. In fact, when people say to me, I'd like you to give a presentation on such and such, I say yes. But then I reframe it in my head. They think it's a presentation, it's actually a conversation. Obviously, I don't say it like
I'm just
no West.
talking. And I can talk all day. I've been talking for my whole life, and it's just talking, right?
That's it. It's just talking. And you know how to engage people. It's a structured conversation. That's what it is. You know,
Awesome.
It's just our primal brain going into threat response.
Awesome. Okay, rapid fire questions. We're near the end here. Frankie, what's one piece of common career or financial advice that you think is completely wrong?
Okay, so one of the worst pieces of advice that I was ever given was about just throwing tons of money into an investment fund. But, you know, you want to get into habits, and you also want to make sure you have cash at the ready. And that's like 3 months cash at the ready. And you want to spread your bets. So it doesn't matter if it's a small amount. It's about habits. And when you're having a good month and you don't have to redecorate, or you haven't treated yourself to that pan-European trip or whatever it is, and you've got a bit of spare, then put it in a pot. But I just think I was given advice when I was on a very low wage, and they were real sharks in the financial sector in those days. And it was like, you know, basically empty your pockets. And, you know, had they just said, you know, give £100 a month, for example, so $120, $30 a month, if you can afford it, just do that. You know, it would be a completely different story if I had been encouraged just to put small parts aside. When I wasn't earning very much at all, my father, bless him, is a financial advisor. You know, it's a real sort of, our family have a much, how can I say it, a loss mentality. So it was all about protecting what you've got. And I was spending a fortune on insurances whilst I was earning peanuts, whereas actually, forget the insurance. At that point, I should have been putting some money aside to watch it grow, not protect what I didn't have.
Yeah, that the scarcity mindset will scarcity, loss prevention, all of that is one of the toughest things for many people to overcome. It holds so many people back, and it limits the trajectory of their career, limits the trajectory of their financial situation. It's really, if I could fix one thing in people, it would probably be that. And it's not the returns, it's the volume. It's the volume of your savings, not the returns that you actually get, right? And I've done studies and, like, you know, look at how much you get from small differences in return versus small differences in the amount that you put in principal or in capital, and the volume, the amount that you put in, by far dominates. You know, just simple practices of saving every month, managing expenses, and buying assets that appreciate. You know, that is the surefire way to wealth, in my opinion. Or you can get lucky. That's another one, which you can't really count on. You can have a big inheritance. You can't really count on. Crypto could come back. You never know for some people.
Yeah.
But I love that. Just, you know, the discipline of just regular investing, even if it's a small amount, it builds that rhythm over time. I love that. That is just such fantastic advice, Frankie.
There is another one. My other piece is, ask yourself whether it's wise to pay off your debts first, because there have been times when I started up my business, I had no backing. There was nothing. I mean, I couldn't take contacts from a big firm. So I was quite different from a lot of trainers and people that do what I do, which meant I had to go back and work. And at one point I had to pull out savings because I had a loan and I wanted to pay the loan down. And actually I regret that, because if I'd have paid the loan slower, those assets would have grown quicker. So the benefit would have outweighed the loan payments. Now, I'm not saying don't pay off your debts, just invest, because there are certain loans which have such a crippling interest rate that it might be wise to get rid of it. So it's not a blanket piece of advice, and God knows I'm no financial advisor, but I'm talking from personal experience where I've looked back and I thought, I shouldn't have pulled it all out.
Okay, that was great on financial. What about for career advice? What would you say there?
Many people feel that they are in a slightly hopeless situation. People are not listening to them. They're being unseen, unheard. Now, I've worked with people, and when they can get their message out there and their presence felt in specific ways to specific people, they have transformed the opportunities that are available to them at work. It's not as hopeless as you think, and all you need to do is find the people and the resources that can help you to do so, because you don't deserve to feel oppressed and unseen and unheard. You deserve, that's why you were taken on, to be valued, and valued for your voice.
Fantastic. Okay, Frankie, you've given us a ton of useful advice to think about. I think we've all, I took a page of notes today myself. And how can we get in touch with you?
frankiekemp.com, www.frankiekemp.com, and you just go into contact and you can get 15-minute free discovery call with me. Just book it. And, we'll chat. And there's under tips and tools, there's my videos and blogs, and all you need to do is write in the subject that you're interested in, and you've got a whole bunch of free resources there as well.
I cannot emphasize enough going to her website and looking over the tools and the videos there. Her videos are fun. Her videos are informative. You won't feel like you're learning, but you are, and they're just absolutely fantastic. I've spent clicking on this and then clicking on that. I spent quite a amount of time doing that. We're of course connected over LinkedIn, and I've seen different things she's put there. Tons of great resources out there. And then book a call with her. She's a ton of fun to talk to, and I don't give out guarantees very much, but I would probably guarantee, like, if you talk to her, you're gonna take away something, and she's gonna make your life, make your career, make your situation a lot better. Frankie, thank you so much for all the super valuable advice today.
It's been a real pleasure. I've loved talking to you and everybody out there. So get in touch. Love to hear from you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Okay, everybody, we will see you next time on Thrive and Achieve, where professionals help professionals thrive in their career and achieve financial success. Have a great day, everybody.